Mouthwashing is an indie horror game developed by Wrong Organ and published by Critical Reflex in 2024.
It's a narrative-driven, walking simulator-style game, following the 5 crew members of a freighter spaceship in the distant future. The game has been incredibly popular following its release, earning itself an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam. The game is presented in anachronic order, throwing the player into different points in time, the story told through the lens of an unreliable narrator. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the story of Mouthwashing and analysing the greater meaning of this modern icon of indie horror games. Please note that this video will contain discussions of sexual assault, rape, suicide, murder, and animated depictions of violence and gore. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, spoilers ahead, so if you have any interest at all in playing through the game for yourself, please do so, as I would highly recommend it. Now it's time to introduce you to the cast of characters that make up our ship's crew, arguably one of the game's strongest elements. First up, we have the ship's captain, Curly. He's an ambitious and successful man, though he shows some insecurities about his career, despite his envied position. He's caring and wants to do what's best for his crewmates and friends, though his judgment can be clouded by his own feelings and loyalties. He's respected by his crew, revered as a great leader, but also as a good friend. Next is Curly's co-pilot, Jimmy. At first, he appears as a morally ambiguous character, trying to do his best in an extreme situation. He is envious of Curly and doesn't hesitate to make this painfully apparent. The designated nurse on the ship is Anya, my personal favourite character. She's kind, determined, competitive, with a sense of humour and a passion for medicine. She's practical and compassionate. Swansea is the resident mechanic, a middle-aged man vexed by his life experiences. He's grumpy and has a history of alcoholism. Despite his rough exterior, we get to discover a softer side to Swansea throughout the game. He has a dry sense of humour and an unrelentingly cynical outlook on life. However, he seems to be well loved by his crewmates. The 5th and final member of the crew is undoubtedly the fan favourite, Daisuke. Swansea's apprentice, he's a bashful yet caring young man with a vastly different attitude to his mentor. He remains optimistic in the face of adversity, sometimes to a fault. His innocence and naivety contrast heavily with the sombre nature of the game. Another recurring character that is important to note is the company mascot, an anthropomorphic horse named Polly. Several posters, figurines, and even a motion-activated animatronic litter the ship. He also plays a major role in the central dream/hallucination sequences in the game, labelled as bizarro scenes by the developers. Crew are employed by a company called the Pony Express, based on the real-life company of the same name. This company, founded in 1860, sent mail on horseback across the United States. Due to significant financial loss, the company went under after just 18 months of operation. The fictional Pony Express, in many instances, is shown to be a neglectful and irresponsible employer. Corporate greed is an overarching theme in the story, and the company's failures act as a catalyst for many, if not all, of the unfortunate events that occur on the ship. The freighter spaceship the crew are on is called the Tulpar, also named after a real-life counterpart. In Turkic mythology, a Tulpar is a winged horse renowned for its incredible speed. It's likely the Pony Express chose this as a mascot for their company to advertise the speed of their service, the asset they value above all else. Anyway, now you're all caught up, let's get to what you've all been waiting for. This is the story of Mouthwashing. Pony Express, long-haul space freighter, Tulpar. Crew, 5. Planned shipment duration, 382 days. Elapsed transit time, 147 days. I hope this hurts. This chapter starts with Curly sitting across from Anya in the medical room as she conducts her weekly psychological evaluation. Curly passes his evaluation, giving the same answers as the last time. Anya says that she wishes he would open up a little more. She also expresses her hesitance to perform the last evaluation, Jimmy's. He never takes them seriously, forcing her to write reports with statements like, "I have found myself sexually excited at the sight of cartoon horses." Noticing her visible discomfort, Curly offers to perform the psych eval in her place, and he goes to leave. Anya hands him a note from Swansea that reads, "They can't expect me to perform miracles," jokingly adding that it sounds like fun and wishing him luck. Once we receive the note from Anya, we are free to explore the medbay and the ship as a whole. To further immerse you in the story, I'm going to give you a rough overview of what the interior of the Tulpar looks like. Exploring the medroom, we can find several details that tell us more about Anya's character. Behind her desk is a corkboard littered with doodles, artsy photographs, and posters about anxiety and mental health. There's a crudely drawn image mocking Jimmy, labelled Yimpy, drawn by Daisuke. You can get a Steam achievement for locking eyes with him for 10 seconds, which I wonder if anyone actually found that out on their own. Anya's shelves are full of books, displaying her love to read and broad variety of interests. 2 of these books in particular stand out. The first is titled Stories from the Overlook Hotel, which is of course a nod to The Shining. This is relevant because Anya's character was modelled on Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance in the 1980 Kubrick masterpiece. Another is called Up or Down, The Illusion of Choice. This is a reference to the developer's previous game, How Fish is Made. I will explore the relevance of this later on in my analysis. In the corner of the room, we can see a vent cordoned off with caution tape, a red note plastered on top signifying danger. Curly mentions that Swansea and Daisuke have been trying to repair it for days. Walking across the hallway, we find the lounge, a space for the crew to spend their downtime. A striking feature of the room is the large screen that displays an image of a cloudy blue sky. This is the ship's artificial window, the crew's only indicator of the passage of time. A board game sits atop the lounge table, and Curly comments on how intense game nights on the ship can get, thanks to Anya's competitive streak and Daisuke's blind luck. The upper level of the lounge acts as a kitchen/dining area with futuristic appliances that dispense and prepare food. Next to the dining table, there stands a talking polyanimatronic that delivers a short jingle and a voice line whenever someone walks past it.
Polly says, I love working on Tubor. It means I have a lot of friends. It also means I have responsibilities. Always remember to log your hours. Yay!
Beside this, we see 4 posters, all featuring the Pony Express mascot. From left to right, we have Polly Says, Don't Be Daft. This poster shows an injured Polly with a cartoonish bump on his forehead and bandages around his leg. It quotes, Proper preparation prevents accidents. It is your responsibility to keep yourself and the crew safe. It also warns the crew that medical expenses are to be docked from their pay. Polly says, Giddy up, Galaxy. The second poster shows Polly flying through space on a box with horns and expresses how the Pony Express pride themselves in their punctual deliveries. Late arrivals will once again be docked from personal credits. Polly says, Lend a hand. This poster is an image of Polly helping out another one of his mascot co-workers, their hands emerging from under a pile of boxes. The poster stresses the importance of teamwork, calling it the soul of success. The small print says that any HR complaints about poor team synergy may result in a collective punishment. Polly says, Rise and shine. The final poster shows Polly waking up content after a restful night of sleep. The caption for this poster explains that sleep is the best rest after a long day of work and that rest should be earned. Red small print beneath this tells the employees not to indulge in over 5 hours of rest, including leisure time. It warns them that rest over the allowed budget might result in disciplinary action. Moving down to the lower deck, we come across a large set of reinforced metal doors, a code required to enter. This is the ship's cargo hold, which isn't accessible to the crew unless in the case of emergency. The crew are oblivious to what they are carrying on deck, which seems to be the norm for many freight workers in real life. Opposite the cargo hold is the utility room, which doubles as Swansea's office. The majority of the space is filled by 4 cryostasis pods, designed to keep the crew cryogenically frozen for 20 years in the event of a crash or other catastrophic event. Curly comments that he regrets not making a bigger fuss about there only being 4 pods for 5 people, due to Daisuke being added to the roster at the last minute. At the back of the room is Swansea's desk, littered with tools and his trademark notes. Next door to this room is the cockpit, set apart from the others by a long corridor and cordoned off by 2 sets of automatic metal doors. The cockpit itself has 2 seats, surrounded by a myriad of screens. There is a utility locker against the wall that contains important items like rope and the Pony Express onboard safety kit. The sleeping quarters and bathrooms of the ship are situated just outside the lounge, but these are not accessible to the player. I think that's about it, so let's jump back into the story. Curly goes to find Swansea to talk to him about the note, finding Daisuke enveloped in a mound of emergency sealant foam. This foam is deployed as a fail-safe mechanism whenever the ship's structure is compromised. In this case, Daisuke's attempt to repair the broken vent has triggered the foam to release. Swansea laments over Daisuke's carelessness, asking Curly for the axe to free him from the foam. The utility axe can only be used by the captain, utilising a key game mechanic in the form of a code scanner. This is essentially a UV light that can be used to reveal secret codes, unlocking restricted items. He frees Daisuke from the foam as Swansea berates his apprentice for meddling with the vent. He tells him that it's almost entirely collapsed inside, and anyone who tried to enter would be impaled, electrocuted, and cooked. He then jokingly asks Curly to give him the axe, implying he's going to use it on Daisuke for being such a nuisance. Curly leaves to meet Jimmy in the cockpit, entrusting the axe to Swansea until he has everything cleaned up. On the way to the cockpit, the music slows down and stops, a long descending staircase appearing where it hadn't been previously. He reaches a ledge that overlooks a deep black abyss, the player given no choice but to jump down into it. We land in a pool of red, a view of space above. As Curly wades through the unknown body of liquid, mangled ladders spring up in whichever direction he walks, along with red emergency signs, an alarm blaring in the background. The sun begins to rise above the horizon, its bright white light filling the screen as more and more ladders break through the surface. The screen turns white and the door to the cockpit appears in the distance. I believe that there are two interpretations to this scene. The first is that it's a metaphor for the conversation that's about to happen, referencing the career ladder. The second is an interpretation of Curly's ignorance to the various warning signs springing up around him. Curly continues to walk towards the door and sits down next to Jimmy. He presumably passes his psychological evaluation and goes on to a more personal conversation with his friend and co-pilot. Curly mentions that Jimmy struggled on Earth and has taken exceptionally well to being a freighter pilot. Jimmy relishes the feeling of being in control, and he resents Curly for having everything that he wants. Jimmy describes Curly's predicament as standing on the edge of a bridge with his feet in cement, implying that he possesses a level of security in his career that Jimmy could only dream of. Curly expresses his concerns that though he has reached the highest rung on the ladder, he isn't entirely sure he's on the right ladder altogether. Jimmy dismisses his doubts, telling him that it's still a long way down from the top, no matter how you look at it. Their conversation is interrupted when they receive a fax from the Pony Express informing the captain that the company is going under and that he and his crew will be laid off as soon as they return to Earth. Curly enters the lounge to find that his crewmates have thrown a surprise birthday party for him. The Pony Express dictates that they are only allowed to celebrate one birthday per hall, and they have chosen to give this to their captain. However, Curly is the only one authorised to access sweetener, so he must make his own birthday cake himself. As they sit down around the cake, the news from the previous day weighs heavy on Curly's mind. He ultimately decides to break the news to the crew. As you can expect, no one takes this well, though one crew member has a particularly bad reaction, this being Jimmy. He once again showcases his envy of Curly, calling back to their conversation in the cockpit. He alleges that Curly got what he wanted, without the guilt, and that he can leave the dirt behind now that his boots are clean. He belittles each of the crew in turn, shaming Anya for not being able to get into medical school, commenting on Swansea's age and Daisuke's reliance on his parents. Jimmy leans back, arms crossed. Let's have some fucking cake, Props to the twilight cruise of the Tulpar. Props to our captain and his new prospects. The player is then instructed to cut the cake, which is crudely sawn in half with an inappropriately large knife. Both unable to sleep, Anya and Curly sit in the lounge as they watch the nighttime screen of the artificial window. Anya tells Curly that there is a dead pixel in the corner of the screen, delivering the poignant line, "In the back of my mind, it's always there." She can't seem to stop thinking about this minuscule imperfection on the screen, though Curly makes little effort to look for it. He tells her that it doesn't ruin the illusion. This is followed by Anya asking him how many days of transit they have left, though she already knows the answer. 8 months. Perhaps intentionally, the number of days Curly says they have left is 237. For any of you horror fans out there, this number may hold some significance for you. This is because room 237 was famously the room the Torrance family stayed in The Shining. In another harrowing line, knowing the later context the game gives us, she asks Curly, "Why do you think the Pony Express put a lock on the medical room door, but not on the sleeping quarters?" Curly responds with, "I suppose for the same reason they put a lock on the cockpit. Safety." The last word flashes up on the screen in bold text. This conversation gives a chilling hint to the sinister events that have been happening on board the Tulpar. Anya is desperately throwing ropes to Curly, but he doesn't quite hold on to them. While looking for the missing safety kit containing a gun and ammo, Curly comes across a distressed Anya crouched in the cockpit. He urges her to tell him where she's hidden it, under the impression she's going to use the gun to harm herself. Anya reveals that she is pregnant, stunning the captain. He assumes that the encounter was consensual, asking Anya who she would have done this with, rather than who would have done this to her. Whether this is a manifestation of Curly's desire to believe the best in people or something more sinister, I will leave that up to you. This is what she had been trying so desperately to share with Curly the night before. It turns out that Jimmy had been assaulting Anya on how many occasions is unspecified, resulting in her conceiving his child. Anya knew she would be forced to perform an unsafe abortion or give birth on the ship, hence why she brought up they had 8 months of transport left. Curly responds with a lack of empathy for Anya, offering only to talk to Jimmy. Anya admits to Curly that she knew he would never have given her the gun to defend herself, but she needed to make sure that he wouldn't be able to get it either, referring, of course, to Jimmy. On the day of the crash, Curly walks in on Anya in the medical room, where she's knelt beside one of the cots, distraught. Curly hasn't yet confronted Jimmy about the pregnancy, so Anya decides to take matters into her own hands. Curly scolds her for not waiting for him, and asks how he responded. She tells him that he didn't say anything that would have made a difference, and that she doesn't want him on the ship anymore. The captain once again consoles her with the knowledge that he can talk to him. He stumbles upon Jimmy outside the cockpit, his head in his hands. He was potentially in the cockpit looking for the safety kit, unaware Anya had already hidden it. Her instincts to hide the weapon from Jimmy were correct, and I believe his intentions were either to harm or threaten Anya with it. Curly reassures him that everything will be okay, reminding him he has gotten through worse before. Jimmy asks Curly what he thinks will happen when they get back to Earth, and Curly only responds that they will get through this together. He chastises him, saying that he has failed in his duties as a captain, as the crew are his responsibility and that both of them will face the consequences. However, he offers an alternative outcome. All this can all be remembered as a tragedy. Despite what must have been the best efforts of its acclaimed captain, the Tulpar crew was never found. No one survived to tell the tale. He continues, "You're standing at the top, feet in cement. I get it now. I'll take care of it." I believe this is Jimmy alluding to the fact that Curly can't or won't do anything to stop him. In my personal opinion, Curly was aware of what his friend was capable of, as in an earlier scene, interacting with the override button on the cockpit controls causes Curly to remark that he should keep an eye on it. He definitely isn't adverse to the idea that Jimmy might do something extreme, yet he decides to sit back and let it happen. Phrases flash across the screen, "Take care of it," and "kills 99%. Curly, for some reason, stares at the floor and allows his friend to walk into the cockpit, where the sequence from the game's opening plays out. Narrative-wise, this is the point where the game's perspective switches from Jimmy to Curly. There's a brief moment in between where we see them both in a third-person view. This hallmarks the point that Curly loses the control over the situation, and perhaps also his role as captain. In the cockpit, the player is instructed to make a correction to the left to avoid collision with an unknown orbital body. You are, however, only given the option to steer right. During this scene, the cockpit is locked, and if you try to exit, Jimmy will say that he can't let anyone in. Then, the player, as Jimmy, takes the control key to access the big red button on the interface, disengaging the autopilot. This diverts the ship onto a collision course as warnings pop up all over the screens, lights flashing red as an alarm sounds. Upon exiting the cockpit, Jimmy is met with nonsensical looping hallways. As he traverses these corridors, more and more Polysays posters plaster the walls. Occasionally, the player will stumble across a locked door and turn around to see an increasingly mutated version of the polyanimatronic from the lounge. This monstrosity blocks the path and forces you to turn back. The state of the ship deteriorates, sparks flying as a cacophony of horses screeching and babies crying echoes through the halls. Hearing the alarms, Curly rushes back to the cockpit to find Jimmy hunched over outside. Curly begs Jimmy to tell him that he hadn't done what he thought he had, though he doesn't respond, giving him his answer. He runs into the cockpit just as the ship crashes, taking the full force of the impact. The screen turns white, accompanied by the sound of an explosion. We pick back up with the Tulpar crew 2 months after the crash, as they all sit around the dining table. The crew deliberate whether or not they should open the cargo hold. Anya takes a practical approach, suggesting that it may be something useful, while Swansea is indignant, worrying that his pay may be docked for doing so. Daisuke reveals that they only have 4 months' worth of food left, which is less than the remaining air supply. The landscape of the ship is now almost entirely unrecognisable. The sleeping quarters have been overtaken by foam, forcing the crew to sleep on spare mattresses from the med room in the lounge. The artificial window has been stuck on sunset ever since the crash, casting an intense orange-red light over the room. At this point, we also find out that Jimmy has taken on the role of captain, replacing an incapacitated Curly. The crew, manipulated by Jimmy, falsely believe that it was Curly that intentionally crashed the ship as a result of the news they received from the company. Thanks to Anya's suggestion, Jimmy goes to retrieve the captain's code scanner from the now wrecked cockpit. On his way back, he visits the medical bay where he finds Anya and Curly, revealing the aftermath of the collision. Curly's skin is practically gone, and he's missing an eye along with his hands and feet. He's badly burned, his bloody body wrapped in bandages, only leaving one wide blue eye and rows of teeth exposed. Anya appears distressed about giving Curly his painkillers, as she can't stand the noise and feels nauseous. Jimmy reluctantly agrees to do it for her, and Anya scurries out of the room. Anya's extreme discomfort around this task could be as a result of her encounters with Jimmy. The stimulus of having to forcibly give Curly his pills acts as a trigger for Anya. The nausea that Jimmy criticises her for is likely his own fault, a direct symptom of her pregnancy. The scenes where you have to give Curly his painkillers are particularly grotesque. Though the screen cuts to black, the sound design here is disgustingly effective. Jimmy follows Anya to the lounge to remind her they are running low on painkillers, doing nothing to console her. She mulls over why Curly would have done what he did, delivering one of the most iconic lines in the game. "I have to believe our worst moments don't make us monsters." She once again excuses herself, and Jimmy goes downstairs to see Swansea. He can be found guarding the door to utility, claiming it's full of foam. He refuses even to let Daisuke in as he deems it too much of a risk. This Bizarro sequence is assigned its own chapter, and though it portrays an event that doesn't actually happen in the timeline, it acts as an ominous introduction for the next chapter. The player walks through the cargo hold, tall rows of shelves towering above them. The room is empty besides the hundreds, perhaps thousands of boxes and an old TV that plays black and white static. At the back of the cargo hold, an image of post-crash Curly can be seen peeking out between the fixtures. If you look at it for too long, you'll get a jump scare as he disappears. You can interact with the TV to change the channels, allowing you to watch a series of clips. The first is a clip from a 1948 animated short called Going Places. It's a piece of propaganda produced after World War II defending against anti-capitalist ideologies. It begins with a young boy who wants to fish but is forced by his mother to work and make soap. Over the years, he creates a successful soap empire so that he may live comfortably in the future. As his business gets larger and more competitors arrive, the man barely notices that his life has passed him by and he is no longer able to enjoy the freedom he worked so hard for. The end of the short, shown on the TV, is about a company giving out benefits to employees, such as fair pay, health insurance, and time off for holidays. It was to make working for large corporations seem more appealing to the youth of the time. Something to note is that one of the perks shown is characterised by a nurse character in an overly sexualised uniform, which feels reminiscent of the way Jimmy views Anya as a commodity and a perk of the job. The second is a clip from a public information film called A is for Atom. It was meant to placate an unsettled America in the years after the Hiroshima bombings. Corporate America deemed it useful to educate the population on what atoms were and how they are not exclusively bad. They are only destructive if humans decide to use them for evil. They portrayed atoms as benevolent giants, each having a purpose: the warrior and the destroyer, the farmer, the engineer, the research worker, and the healer. These are personifications of the ways atomic processes can be invaluable, such as in healthcare or agriculture. These characters may also be assigned to the Tolpark crew if you would like to look at it that way. This line in particular stood out to me. But all are within man's power, subject to his command. Our future depends on man's wisdom, on his firmness in the use of that power. This summarises that atoms are capable of evil and destruction, though only at the hands of men. I think this is representative of Jimmy's character and how he chose to wield his power over others. Another clip shows a NASA animation of a black hole swallowing a star. The black hole resembles Curly's eye, so I guess that's why this particular clip was chosen. It may also have greater connotations, but I'll let you tell me in the comments. Another propaganda short released in 1948 shows a group of people signing away their belongings, their lives, and the lives of their children to a company called ISM. An associate of the business, a classic snake oil salesman, shows all of them a bottle and the label appears differently to each of them. There is only one man who is suspicious of this and decides to read the clause. I think ISM is very similar to the Pony Express in many ways. The company is appealing to all of the crew for a different reason. It provides Anya with a place to train and save money for a career in medicine, an escape from life for Jimmy and Curly, and a comfortable place for Swansea to bide his time until retirement. It's also a commonly held opinion that the name ISM or ism refers to socialism. The final clip is a French stop-motion film from 1898 called The Merry Skeleton, where a skeleton dances and crumbles into a pile of bones before reassembling itself. This chapter ends with an advert for Dragon Breath X mouthwash. A light-hearted jingle plays in the background as the camera zooms into a bright summer scene and we see a bottle of mouthwash. The label states that it kills 99.9% of germs, and with a tagline of "All Day Fire Fresh." There's a disclaimer at the bottom of the advert that states Dragon Breath Co. will not accept responsibility for any harm caused by the use of this product. The crew eventually land upon the decision to open the cargo hold, Jimmy using the code scanner to reveal the access code. As they enter, they come face to face with the realization of the product they've been hauling for the last 7 months. Not food or water, nor medical supplies. Mouthwash. Each of the characters' reactions in this moment are reflective of their personalities. Jimmy immediately responds with anger, whilst Anya tries to find possible uses for the mouthwash. She states that its sugar content negates its potential use as a disinfectant, though Swansea notes the 14% ethanol content, breaking his 15-year sobriety streak with no hesitation. Daisuke isn't sure how to react, once again searching for the positives of the situation. I suppose we'll smell good at least? I guess anyone could get seriously blasted off this stuff. Swansea pats Daisuke on the back, asking if anyone had ever taught him to drink like a man, before the screen dissolves into the next chapter. In the middle of what we assume to be the night, Jimmy wakes up to Curly moaning in pain and goes to check on him. Not knowing if he'd already been given his painkillers, he goes to find Anya. He comes across her having a somber conversation with Swansea in the cockpit, which abruptly halts when he enters. There are two things people believe this conversation might have been about, though I think it was both. I believe Anya was telling Swansea about Jimmy, if not about her pregnancy, then about her concerns of him being dangerous. I think Anya asked to talk with Swansea in the cockpit because the Tulpar's walls are remarkably thin, hence Jimmy being awoken by Curly's cries in the first place. The cockpit is the only place on the ship where Curly's moaning can't be heard. It has a lock and is only accessible by passing through 2 sets of very loud automatic doors. Swansea took the axe with him either to keep it safe from Jimmy or at Anya's request. I think the second half of the conversation was Swansea discussing with Anya his intentions regarding the utility room, which we'll get into later in the story. When Jimmy enters, Anya turns away and covers her face. He insensitively asks her if she's crying and coldly tells her to keep it together. He asks whether or not she had given Curly his meds. She profusely apologises, saying that it must have slipped her mind. Before she can say she'll do it, Jimmy cuts her off and tells her he'll take care of it. Jimmy challenges Swansea about the axe, to which he replies, "Don't overthink it." This simple interaction displays how paranoid Jimmy really is, and his suspicion that Swansea knows the truth about him. He finds that there are only a handful of painkillers left, and soon they won't have anything to keep him quiet. As his condition worsens and he becomes more resistant to taking the pills, Jimmy resorts to physical violence in order to force him down in another gruesome audio clip. Take Responsibility flashes on the screen once again, and we transition into another hallucination sequence. Jimmy enters a now desecrated version of the lounge, mirroring how it looks later in the game. The artificial window is smashed, piles of mouthwash fill the doorways and are piled up on all of the beds except Anya's, which has a decapitated Polly statue fallen over next to it. The room is bathed in an eerie red light, as Curly sits, illuminated, at the dinner table, in front of a birthday cake. Jimmy sits down and has a conversation with him. Curly remarks on how the best moments in life are few and far between, and how he wishes to relish the small, mediocre moments, commenting on how the subpar stuff makes the really good stuff, well, good. He then delivers one of the most profound lines in the game. "All I can do is try to make my life one I'm not trying to run from all the time. Sometimes I'll be promoted, buy a house, fall in love, but other times I'll just have some awful fucking cake with my friend. Right now, that sounds pretty brilliant, yeah?" Jimmy leaves to find a knife with which to cut the cake. He enters the cockpit, finding a bloodied utility axe lodged in the headrest of the pilot's chair. He picks it up and returns to the lounge. Curly's eye appears on the distorted screen, following Jimmy's every movement. Curly is now inexplicably lying across the dining table, replacing the cake. This scene doesn't seem to fit in anywhere chronologically, so since it's a hallucination/dream that could have happened at pretty much any time, I'll leave it where it happened in the game. It isn't long until Daisuke gives in to drinking the mouthwash along with Swansea, spending their days in a falsely and briefly euphoric drunken stupor. Swansea can be found dancing in front of the window screen, flailing the axe around with disregard. We find Daisuke barely conscious in the hallway outside utility, as he laments over his life's failures and his parents' disappointment in him. Jimmy finds Anya sitting alone at the dining table, seemingly deep in thought as she stares at a bottle of mouthwash. It's clear she's debating on drinking it herself. Jimmy sits down, once again startling her. She mentions to him that there's a locker containing spare medication in the corridor outside medical, though it's foamed up. She suggests he may be able to get to it. Jimmy goes to confront a deeply inebriated Swansea to ask him for the axe he's been holding on to. Swansea refuses at first, as Captain Curly entrusted him with the axe. Swansea becomes irate and swings the axe at the screen, causing it to shatter. Jimmy takes the axe from the screen and chips away at the foam to get to the locker, in which he finds more painkillers and a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. Anya praises him for accessing the med locker, saying that she believed in him and telling him how capable he is. She once again asks him to give Curly his painkillers, and though frustrated, he reluctantly agrees. At first, this may seem like unusual behaviour from Anya, given the pair's history. This is what's called a fawn response, which is an extended element of the fight or flight response. She's sucking up to Jimmy as a defence, and also to soften the blow of asking him to give Curly his meds. Anya is doing all that she can to survive in this hostile environment. Speaking to Curly, Jimmy tells him that he now understands the pressure that he was under, blaming him for leaving him in the driver's seat. He reassures the former captain that he's going to fix things. A panicked Daisuke runs to alert Jimmy that Anya is locked inside the medical room. Jimmy asks her if the door is stuck, and to his surprise, she replies that she isn't. She's locked herself inside, and despite Jimmy's cursing and Daisuke's pleading, she refuses to open the door. Jimmy selfishly expresses his concerns that all of the ship's medical supplies are stuck in there with her. Anya gives a short speech, telling Jimmy he was right all along, and that she should have done this from the beginning. She says, "I always believed that our worst moments didn't define us, didn't make us beyond repair. You think I wanted this either? Make no mistake, this isn't my worst moment. Far from it. It's the best decision I'll ever make. I'll take care of it." I believe Anya was alluding to what Jimmy may have said when she confronted him about her pregnancy. My interpretation is that Jimmy had told Anya to get rid of the baby by any means possible, and that is what she's referring to in her monologue. Jimmy implies to Daisuke that she might do something to hurt Curly as the latter gets increasingly worried for her safety. He questions Daisuke about another potential route into medical, reminding him of the collapsed vent in utility. He expresses his hesitance, saying that it's dangerous and would get him in big trouble with Swansea, though Jimmy persuades him to help. Jimmy proposes they make a cocktail with a little extra kick in order to knock out Swansea so they can enter utility unobstructed. They make the cocktail, substituting the usual water and tonic for mouthwash and isopropyl alcohol. They meet Swansea outside utility, as you might expect, heavily intoxicated. Jimmy presents to him the spiked cocktail as a peace offering, and Swansea snaps at them both. He berates Daisuke, saying, "You never should have come here. Who the fuck even decided to let you board, huh? Stick the idiot with a bunch of sad sack adults and see what he learns, eh? You think it's all going somewhere, but every failure leaves you a little more mangled than before. Older, uglier, meaner, smarter in a worse way." He mocks Jimmy for the way he's acting, running the ship as if nothing were happening in the face of certain death. I say take a load off before the sun finally sets on this party. May we never go to hell, but always be on our way. With this, he accepts the spiked cocktail, downing it in one go. As Jimmy assured Daisuke, he passes out, hitting the deck of the ship. Inside utility, they discover that Swansea had been lying all along about the state of the room, and in fact, it's barely foamed up at all. They notice that only one of the cryostasis pods is still working. Jimmy is quick to theorise that Swansea's plan is to wait for everyone else to die so he can take the pod for himself. Daisuke searches for another explanation, suggesting he may have simply forgotten to tell them about the pod, but Jimmy isn't convinced. He coaxes Daisuke to enter the vent in order to prove himself to Swansea. He tells him that he'll be impressed when he wakes up, proud. He tells him that everyone is counting on him and it's captain's orders. Using this as ammunition, he convinces Daisuke to climb into the vent, shortly followed by him yelling out in pain as he navigates the decimated insides. Once he reaches medical, he sounds distressed, asking Anya, "What did you do?" In the lounge, the player finds a severely wounded Daisuke as he lies on Swansea's mattress, covered in blood and writhing in pain. Swansea asks Jimmy for the disinfectant, but he admits he used it for the spiked cocktail, claiming that it's his own fault that he doesn't have it. When Jimmy enters medical to look for more disinfectant, the corner of the room by Curly's cot is obscured by a blurry, glitchy smudge. Swansea gruffly tells him that he's already looking in there and he should try somewhere else. We see blood trailing out from the broken vent where Daisuke dragged himself toward the lounge. Jimmy comments that he made it out of the other side so they can still save him. Jimmy goes downstairs, noticing a gravestone lit up outside the doors to the cargo hold. A pink hibiscus flower lies next to it, mimicking the ones on Daisuke's shirt. At this point, if the player tries to walk away from the gravestone, Take Care of It and Take Responsibility will flash up on the screen and reroute them. Jimmy uses the code scanner on the gravestone, allowing him access to the cargo hold. Blood is splattered on a descending staircase, though it can only be seen under the light of the code scanner. The hold morphs into a nonsensical maze of twisting, upside-down staircases. As Jimmy reaches the bottom, a message flashes up on the screen, this time telling him to be quiet. A note rests atop a stack of mouthwash boxes that reads, "A blind beast, aimless and restless. You can't run from it." This is where we enter the first minigame style segment. In this section, the player must navigate the maze-like cargo hold, their clanging footsteps on the metal grates attracting the attention of the blind beast. As Jimmy tries to remain quiet, he is pursued by a more realistic version of the Polly mascot, only visible in the light of the code scanner. This rendition of Polly is absolutely horrific. It has empty eye sockets, an impossibly long neck, and a series of holes in one side of its face. If the player makes too much noise, the room will begin to shake, boxes will rattle, and the horse's screeching will get louder. Eventually, Polly will swoop down and the screen will cut to black, the phrase "be quiet" popping up once again as the player is returned to the beginning of the level. When Jimmy reaches the end, he is greeted by a Polly figurine standing victorious on a mountain of mouthwash, holding up a bottle in the air. Jimmy takes it from him. Something you'll begin to notice as we get further into the story is that Jimmy has a habit of exaggerating every small task, evolving it into some brave, heroic journey. In Jimmy's mind, he's inflating his responsibilities and making a huge deal out of anything he's asked to do, or expected to do as captain. He returns to Daisuke, unable to find any disinfectant. Ignoring Anya's advice, he resorts to pouring mouthwash in Daisuke's wounds as a substitute. Daisuke repeatedly apologizes for messing up, as Jimmy reassures him he'll fix this. Two hours later, Daisuke is still lying there, barely conscious as Jimmy and Swansea are unable to stop the bleeding. Swansea picks up the utility axe as Jimmy desperately yells at him to stop. Swansea gives Daisuke a heartfelt and emotional speech, telling him to relax. He says, "You could never have become like miserable old Swansea. I thought you were dumber than a can of paint, always just chewing my ear off about nothing. Useless ray of goddamn sunshine. Not an ace student, career workhorse, or force of ambition. Just a damn good kid trying his best. You could have taught an old fool like me a lot. Close your eyes, Daisuke." He raises the axe above his head and brings it down on the boy lying before him, killing him instantly. Jimmy calls Swansea a monster and says he could have fixed it if he just gave him time to think. Swansea remarks that he didn't want Daisuke to have to suffer because of Jimmy's delusions anymore. He confronts Swansea about his plan to take the cryopod for himself. Swansea laughs, telling him that that was never the case, and welcomes Jimmy to get in it if that's what he wants. He has no use for it anymore. We can imply that Swansea intended to let Daisuke use the final pod to save his life, and that this is what he was telling Anya about in the cockpit. At this point, the player is tasked with finding the gun. Now when the player enters medical, the previously censored corner can be seen clearly. This reveals Anya slumped over beside Curly, empty bottles of painkillers strewn across the floor. She locked herself in so that she could overdose on the remaining medication without being interrupted, or perhaps to stop anyone, particularly Jimmy, getting in after her death. The drawer beneath Curly's bed has been left open, either in a last-ditch effort of Anya's to try and use the gun to end her life, or perhaps on Curly to save him the agonizing death of being left to starve in the locked medbay with no painkillers. Jimmy opens the case as Curly gives a defeated yet sinister laugh. Jimmy turns around to see Swansea charging at him with the axe. Jimmy runs to lock himself in the cockpit as he pulls a broken pipe from the wall and retrieves a length of nylon rope from the utility locker. As he attempts to use these to barricade the door, Swansea swings the axe, shattering the window. He reaches inside for the latch. The player now appears in a dark hallway, a spotlight shining on the door to the medical room. Another spotlight is trained on the entrance to the broken vent, with Daisuke's blood splattered around it. Swansea's keys dangle over the hatch like bait as the player descends into the vent. The vent is littered by items of significance on the ship. There's a filing cabinet with an empty can of chicken noodle soup on top, along with Daisuke and Jimmy's board game pieces. Daisuke's is knocked over, whereas Jimmy's is upright. The soup is relevant because in an earlier conversation, Daisuke asks Jimmy if he wants to rock, paper, scissors for the last chicken noodle. A phantom Daisuke appears and he disappears if you try to follow him, replaced by another hibiscus flower. The lights turn red and a note appears on one of the vent hatches. It says, "No turning back now." If the player does try to turn back, the screen will distort, displaying a grainy red image of Daisuke and / dividing his face. Jimmy is now forced to walk backwards through the vent system. The items Daisuke kept next to his bed in the lounge are laid out on the floor, with several of his hands reaching out to them. You can't look at them for too long, or Daisuke's split face will appear. The image of Daisuke's hands around his things is reminiscent of this poster on Anya's bulletin board. It shows hands reaching out towards a drop of water, with the word "clean" in white lettering inside. I think this is an example of elements from the ship incorporating themselves into Jimmy's hallucinations. Turning a corner, we're met with another vent hatch, a recreation of the one in the medical room, adorned with caution tape and a red note from Swansea. The text has been replaced by "responsibility" underscored 3 times. Between the bars of the hatch, you can see several Swanseas peeking out. If you make eye contact with them, the screen will once again distort and redirect the player. Jimmy walks further and further back from the note until it fades into the black distance. Jimmy then finds himself in a corridor where he begins to walk before falling down an upturned hallway. The walls are plastered with alternative, darker versions of the Polly Says posters. The Rise and Shine poster now depicts Polly waking up with a bottle of mouthwash in hand. The hands in the Lend a Hand poster are now bloodied, and the Don't Be Daft replaces the hammer for the red utility axe. There isn't an alternate version of the Giddy Up Galaxy poster, though I'm not too sure about the relevance of this. Perhaps it could be because the possibility of them even reaching their destination has been entirely eliminated. Eventually, Jimmy falls into a sideways iteration of the med room, the entrance to the vent surrounded by dozens of axes lodged into the wall. As you're falling, the bird's eye view of Polly posters and gravestones creates the shape of a cell. With nowhere else to go, Jimmy's forced to crawl into the vent, filled with emergency sealant foam, exposed wires, and jagged edges. After traversing the perils of the collapsed vent, he drops into utility where Swansea is tied to a chair. If you look around at the cryopods in this scene, you can see Daisuke's heads filling all of them, consolidating the idea that Swansea wanted to use the final one for his apprentice. The gun lies on the floor in front of Swansea. Jimmy picks it up and aims it at his head. When he pulls the trigger, he's transported into another of the game's minigame segments. The player finds themselves in a misty graveyard with tombs dedicated to Daisuke. Half of the tombs are closed, and I believe these might be for Anya, though of course Jimmy refuses to acknowledge her, so the doors remain sealed. The player must successfully shoot Swansea 3 times, whilst avoiding him killing you with the axe. After shooting him for the 3rd time, you will win the game and return to the story. There's a Steam achievement for letting Swansea kill you 10 times in this scene, titled The Good Ending. Gun in hand, Jimmy stands in front of Swansea, who tells him to shut up and listen. A series of home videos flashes behind their silhouettes as Swansea delivers his final speech. This is another one of my favourite moments in the game, as it really adds depth to Swansea's character. In his final moments, he opens up about becoming sober and getting his life together. Buying a house, getting married, having kids. He admits that the days he spent drunk were the best of his life, and essentially tells Jimmy he's ready to die. He implies he's a better man than Jimmy will ever be, because unlike him, he isn't ashamed to admit his faults and shortcomings. The scene ends with Jimmy telling Swansea that he can fix things and they can both make it out, to which Swansea stoically replies, "Fuck you." With that, Jimmy aims the gun at Swansea and shoots him in the head. Jimmy carries Curly into the lounge and lays him across the dining table where the rest of the crewmates are sitting. From Jimmy's perspective, his friends are sitting upright, sporting birthday hats and cheering him on. Anya has blood pouring from her nose and mouth, Daisuke has a slash in his face, and Swansea has 2 bullet wounds, one in his eye and another in his forehead. When the perspective cuts to above the table, you can see the crew members slumped over in their chairs, lifeless. Jimmy's delusions bring this gruesome scene to life, imagining his friends talking and clapping as they wish him a happy birthday. They encourage him to make a speech. The player once again takes the knife and this time saws through Curly's leg. This is what's called a Cerebus callback to the earlier scene of Curly cutting the cake. A Cerebus callback is where a previously innocent and light-hearted moment is revisited with a darker tone. He serves a slice of his leg to each of the crew, planting himself at the head of the table with his own slab of Curly. He tells Curly that he forgives him for all he's done and he won't give up on him, that he will fix things. He encourages the table to eat and survive. The real world becomes more intertwined with Jimmy's delusions as it becomes difficult to distinguish fantasy from reality. In another hallucination sequence, Jimmy exits utility to find another series of winding and distorted corridors, with jagged pipes now filling the space. Curly's bloodied cot is trapped between some pipes in the wall, and his bulging eyes appear all over the walls, covering the surface as he rounds every corner. The walls shift into a red, fleshy tunnel, dark veins running across the sides. Jimmy reaches the end, emerging from a scaled-up version of Curly's head, mouth agape. His usual wide, all-seeing eye is now missing. He traverses a bridge to reach the real Curly, propped up on a chair surrounded by TV screens. He has a multitude of wheels, like the one seen in the cockpit, lodged into his body. An old-fashioned television faces him, alternating between 2 clips. The first is a black and white video of a family eating steak, grotesquely reminiscent of the family dinner of sorts in the previous scene. The second is a cartoon clip of a town of singing animals preparing for Mother Goose's birthday. When the cake appears, the player is prompted to take Curly's leg, and a red screen with the word feast appears. The screen casts a red light over Curly. In order to successfully feed Curly his own leg meat, the player must turn the wheels that coordinate with intestine-like tubes on each of the screens. When the player opens Curly's mouth and feeds him the leg, a bulge will travel through the tubes. If the orientation of the screens is correct, Curly will throw the leg up onto his lap. You must continue to do this until the positions are correct and Curly keeps the food down. Upon succeeding, the message on the TV screen changes to "Help me." We then see Jimmy walking through space inside the TV before the image fills the entire screen. He continues to walk through the starlit void until he reaches Curly, who sits in a chair in flames. Collapsing before him, Jimmy breaks down and apologizes, telling his friend he'll fix things. I'll just play the scene in full because it's just too good. Jimmy then finds himself once again in the vent network, this time before a fleshy mass. There is an ultrasound machine on a trolley to his right. When equipped, you can see inside the mass, accompanied by the faint sound of a heartbeat. The beat crescendos as you get closer to a sonogram image of a horse fetus. The player must look at the image for a while, before an eyelid opens on the fleshy mass, a milky pupil now staring at Jimmy. The player must find this for a second time to open the second eye. Something I noticed is that the eyes of this creature kind of looked like Anya's dead eyes, which I think was the intention. A mutated centipede-like version of Polly shoots out from the creature as the phrase "I hope this hurts" flashes on the screen. Polly says, "All clean." Jimmy must then run through the vent system while ducking around corners to hide from the creature. Baby's cries bounce off the metal walls. Upon completion of this final minigame, Jimmy enters a hallway full of floating ID cards. More cards line the walls, eventually filling up the entire space. All of the crew's cards are present, though both Anya and Curly's faces are entirely obscured by Jimmy's cards, and Curly's is unsigned. At the end, he comes across a staircase, empty mouthwash bottles tumbling down the steps. Once he reaches the top, the cargo hold, almost entirely filled with huge piles of mouthwash, appears before him. Polly stands atop the pile, a spotlight beaming down on him. This is another segment that I'll play in full because I honestly could not do it justice by explaining it. We'll talk more about the meaning this has in the story later. Okay, now this is a whole lot, so I'm just going to go over this again a little bit. It all gets very convoluted with the Bizarro sequences, but I think I've gotten them all in chronological order between the main scenes. There are a few different interpretations as to what happened in the previous few chapters, but here's the series of events I believe makes the most sense. After Swansea kills Daisuke, Jimmy retrieves the gun as Curly laughs at the irony of the situation. He realises that Anya was justified in hiding the gun from Jimmy. He goes to the cockpit where he pulls a broken pipe from the wall and takes the emergency rope before confronting Swansea, presumably already in utility or chasing him into the utility room. Jimmy has a vision of barricading the door with the pipe and nylon rope, though in reality he used the former to beat Swansea and the latter to bind him to a chair. I believe the scene of Swansea breaking into the cockpit was entirely a figment of Jimmy's imagination. In the inventory there is a static ball only titled "My Hands Won't Stop Shaking." As evidenced in earlier scenes, Swansea has little reason or motivation to fight back. He told Jimmy he wouldn't stop him from using the cryopod, wishing to sacrifice himself as he's got nothing else to live for. If Swansea was fighting back, surely Jimmy would have just used the gun in the first place. Him being pursued by an enraged Swansea through the vent was his own twisted version of the events that took place after Daisuke's death. He twists the narrative in a way that frames him as the hero, the same feat he attributed to Curly earlier in the game. At some point after killing Swansea, Jimmy sets all of his dead crewmates around the dinner table, creating a false tableau of normality. He cuts off one of Curly's legs, as at this point their food supply would have already run out. This brings to mind an earlier exchange between Jimmy and Anya, where he remarks that there are two reasons for them to keep Curly alive, though he doesn't elaborate. I think one of those reasons was that they could use him as a source of food after their supplies dwindled. Finishing his own plate, he attempts to feed Curly some of his own flesh, but as he realises it won't work, he breaks down. He apologises to Curly and expresses his desire to make things right, to fix things. The scene where Jimmy is being chased by the polypede has an extremely dark interpretation that honestly just makes me feel sick, so we're not going to get too deep into this. I've seen people saying that they believe the ultrasound scene was Jimmy either imagining or actually taking out the fetus from Anya's corpse in an attempt to destroy the problem. After the polypede emerges from the mass, the Polly jingle plays and Polly says, "All clean." Jimmy feels he has cleansed himself of his wrongdoings, that he has, in a twisted way, fixed things. I'll talk in more detail about Polly's significance in the Bizarro sequences and the story as a whole. This leads us to the final chapter of the game. Jimmy picks up Curly from the dinner table and the player is instructed to go home. They enter the utility room after traversing another impossibly long corridor. All the while, Curly's laboured, hissing breath pierces the silence of the lonely ship. He places Curly in the cryopod and the game, for one last time, switches to Curly's perspective. Helpless, Curly can do nothing but look around the pod, unable to move or change anything, forced to watch the scene that plays out before him. Jimmy gives a monologue. "It's okay, Curly. You're going to be okay. You always had my back. I ended up hurting you even though I was trying to save us. But now you'll survive. It's like you said, together we can fix anything. I'm just proud I got to be your friend and co-pilot, Captain. No one can hurt you now. We fixed it. I fixed it." He returns the title of captain back to his friend, the title he ties to responsibility. He engages the pod and steps out of Curly's view. We see a flash and the sound of a gunshot pierces the air as the pod fills with vapour and the window freezes over, the credits rolling. He doesn't even bother to wait to see if the pod works, so that he can die believing that he's Curly's saviour. He relinquishes all responsibility and takes a coward's way out. This brings us to the end of the story and into the analysis portion of this video. Mouthwashing has become known for its complex and well-written characters. They show a full spectrum of different archetypes, but they're all realistic and undeniably human. I found myself relating to all of the characters at one point or another. I relate to Curly's unrelenting desire to see the best in people, and his insecurity in his life and career choices. I relate to Daisuke's naive, childish need to please everyone around him, even at a detriment to himself. I see myself in Swansea, his tired, defeated outlook on life, and also his ability to crack jokes the whole way. Anya's grapple with overcoming her trauma and their never-ending search to find deeper meaning in her suffering. And, unfortunately, I relate to Jimmy's deep-rooted self-hatred and pessimism that keeps him stuck in the same vicious cycle as it repeats. In this section of the video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth profile analysis of each of the characters individually and explore the relationship dynamics between them. A lot of the information in this segment came from the developer diaries and Q&As that can be found on the game's Steam page. Curly. From his ID card, his full name appears to be Grant Curly, though the crew solely refer to him by his last name. This formal address is often associated with high-ranking individuals and can also be a sign of respect. All of the characters are modelled on iconic horror movie characters from the 80s and 90s. It's never explicitly stated which character Curly was modelled on, but it's been speculated he was based on Captain R.J. McCready from The Thing. It's easy to spot the parallels of the very similar setting, both leading a ship where they face a moral dilemma of some sort, the outfit and the hairstyle. Though the alien monster on board the Tulpar was just a man, I think this is an interesting connection. A fun little detail included in the dev Q&A were the crew members' favourite Pokemons. Curly's favourite Pokemon is Pikachu, which I think says a lot about his character. Pikachu is objectively the most well-known and also the safest answer. This emphasises his desire to blend in with others, not to cause a scene or stray from the beaten path. It could also show a general disinterest in getting to know things below surface level. He also remarks on how he's brought the same playlist along on voyages for years, saying, "When it's right, it's right." This goes to show how Curly is adverse to change. It's mentioned that Curly loves weightlifting and is eager to try new things. He developed a keen interest in snow sports while searching for something to fulfill his life and give him purpose. Another detail I found particularly interesting in the Q&A was the way the devs answered the question about Curly's best birthday memory. The response reads, "Curly isn't all that into sweets. His friends, including Jimmy, made him a cake out of chocolate and whey protein powder one year. It collapsed under its own weight and tasted like a chalkboard. One of Curly's fondest birthday memories." This is a prime example of Curly's contentment with the smaller triumphs in life, settling for those okay moments he shares with his friends and family. The hallucination sequence in which Jimmy and Curly are in the lounge with the cake could be a nod to this past memory he shared with Jimmy. He's recycling old memories while using Curly as a mouthpiece in his hallucinations. Curly is a morally ambiguous character that people find hard to categorise. At first, he seems like a great leader, a compassionate captain that is stern yet fair. He seems to genuinely care about the well-being of his crew, asking Jimmy how he really feels off the record after his psyche eval. He tells Anya that he would have done anything to help her had she come to him earlier about her assault. However, whether it's due to simple obliviousness or apathy, he tends to miss key details. He says as such in his late-night conversation with Anya. He makes little effort to look for the dead pixel, stating that it doesn't ruin the illusion. I believe this is a metaphor for how the bad things happening on the ship don't seem to ruin the illusion of peace for Curly. Jimmy, or more specifically his abuse, is the Tolpar's dead pixel, though Curly can't see it. He can only see the bigger picture, not realising what Anya had been suffering at the hands of his friend until she more or less explicitly told him. He possesses an inherent need to see the best in people to a fault. Most of his criticisms come from his lack of action when he eventually realised what Jimmy had done. He offers only to talk to Jimmy, offering very little comfort to his victim. This is a situation that we unfortunately see all too much in real life, those in power not taking instances of sexual harassment and assault seriously, because the perpetrator is a good friend or they would never do something like that. Or even an allegation like that could ruin them. They have a promising future ahead of them, or a reputation to be upheld. Though I don't think we should be too harsh on him, he is definitely not on the same level of evil as Jimmy. To a certain extent, Curly is a victim of Jimmy's abusive behaviour too, trapped by his manipulative tactics and volatile nature. It's important to remember though that he was only human, with his own fears and inner turmoil. Confronting Jimmy in such a confined space and being stuck with him for another 8 months could very easily go wrong. This would only put the crew in more danger, especially Anya. It's also safe to say he felt at least a little threatened by or even afraid of Jimmy. He allows him to degrade and humiliate him, and it's implied he knows what he's really capable of. Of course, he could and should have done more to help Anya as her friend and captain, but no one truly knows how they'll react until they're presented with the situation. Ultimately, he paid the price for his inaction, suffering a fate far worse than death. With his eyelids and autonomy stripped away, he's forced to see everything going on, no longer able to turn a blind eye to the horrors that surround him. No longer able to do or change anything. He watched Anya overdose, he watched a mangled Daisuke crawl out the vent just to be mercy killed by Swansea. He most likely heard Swansea being attacked and killed, knowing that he would be next. The more I think about Curly's situation, the worse it gets. It seems that anything good Curly does do is punished in one way or another. He brought Jimmy onto the ship in the first place to try and help him, inadvertently leading to the Tolpar's downfall. He tried to fix Jimmy's mistake in the cockpit and save his crew, ending up horrifically mutilated. He told the crew about their termination earlier than he was told to because he wanted to be honest with his friends, and this caused Jimmy to snap. He eventually ended up taking responsibility, albeit too late, in his heroic act to save the ship and its crew. One last thing is that Curly's first appearance as a character was in Wrong Organ's debut game How Fish Is Made. We first get to see a post-crash Curly in the DLC expansion for the game, titled The Last One and Then Another. I'll talk more about this game and more specifically its DLC later on in my analysis. Onto the deuteragonist of the story, Jimmy. His full name looks to be Jimmy Jones. Its generic simplicity makes sense, as the developers' intentions were to make Jimmy look like the average guy. This is an interesting take on the classic villain, where certain characteristics are played up to make them appear more stereotypically evil. Jimmy's design mimics the way that many abusers may appear in real life, as monsters don't have a particular look to them. He's named after Lana Del Rey's A&W, a song about the experience of modern-day women and being over-sexualized and abused. His favourite Pokemon is Mega Rayquaza. Rayquaza is a serpentine Pokemon, serpents being a symbol of evil and destruction. Also, Rayquaza can only Mega Evolve by destroying and consuming meteorites to gain energy, like the one that Jimmy may well have crashed the ship into. This may be completely unrelated, but if it was intentional, it's an incredibly fun detail. Jimmy is also into weightlifting, an interest he shares with Curly. This creates another point of comparison between the two, adding to Jimmy's feelings of inadequacy and misplaced sense of competition with his friend. He also believes that hobbies are for people that can afford them. This may seem like a minuscule, inconsequential detail at first glance, though it's much more than that. Not only does it showcase Jimmy's tendency to wallow in self-pity and blame external factors for his misfortune, it may tell us a great deal about his background. It's been speculated that Jimmy may be an ex-convict. After his psych eval, Curly notes that Jimmy struggled back on Earth. This evidence is solidified by Curly's dialogue in The Last One and Then Another, where he reveals he was the reason Jimmy was on the ship in the first place, insinuating he may have helped him with legal trouble in the past. He joined because of me. Change hurts, but worse things fester for a long time. I told him as much. I tried. I really did. We're defined by our past, but not slaves to it. Jimmy's financial struggles hinted to in the Q&A could be a result of his time spent in the legal system or a criminal record acting as a deterrent for potential employers, perhaps both. It's safe to assume that this would be no obstacle for the Pony Express, given their usual disregard for employee safety. Throughout the game, Jimmy showcases a plethora of deplorable traits. He hosts a dangerous combination of narcissism and self-loathing. He repeatedly belittles his fellow crew members and makes no attempt to hide his intense jealousy of Curly. He believes he is a victim of circumstance and can do no wrong. A massive theme in the game is the idea of taking responsibility, which Jimmy is apparently deathly allergic to. He is physically unable to see his faults and wrongdoings, painting himself as the hero in the story. He is short-tempered and prone to violent outbursts, getting angry after Curly breaks news from the company, attacking Swansea in utility, and breaking the Polly statue in the lounge. This was confirmed in the dev Q&A. He's shown to be impulsive and manipulative, choosing to crash the ship in an attempt to end the lives of himself and his crew rather than face the consequences of his actions. He exploits people's kindness and weaknesses to force them to do what he wants. Jimmy is the clear villain of Mouthwashing, though we don't see it at first. We only see a version of his warped perspective, proving to be far from the reality of the story. Jimmy and Curly are an example of a romantic foil, like Sherlock and Moriarty or Rick and Negan from The Walking Dead. They share a strange level of toxic codependence that results in the downfall of the ship. Though Jimmy is the clear antagonist, Curly is undoubtedly an enabler in this situation. He allows Jimmy to mistreat all of the crew, including himself, when his responsibility as captain is to discipline him. He does nothing when he finds out about Anya's assault and lets him crash the ship. You could argue that Curly is also a victim of Jimmy's manipulation, but I think it runs much deeper than that. It's heavily implied that Curly had his own problems in his life. He refers several times to the overwhelming feeling that he wants to escape or run away from his life. This is also mentioned in one of his monologues in The Last One and Then Another. You say to yourself, this is just temporary, just until I get what I need. Got bigger things planned. Then suddenly you're 1 year in. 5 years, 10. First I couldn't stand the constant noise. Now I can't sleep without it. A lot of things can't follow you out here. But it also means the outside world moves on without you. Won't even notice until it's too late. Easy to get on, hard to leave. Curly doesn't see his success in the Pony Express as an achievement, rather as a consequence of his years of inaction, the years wasted running from his life. He also indicates that there's something in his life he needs to get away from. This could be a past trauma, consequences of his actions, grief, whatever else. This could also explain the intense empathy he feels for Jimmy, and his unrelenting desire to help him as if he were helping himself. He also implies that he has lost family or friends back home, and has waited so long that he would have nothing to go back to if he were to leave the Pony Express. This gives us an insight into why he might have knowingly let Jimmy crash the ship. Death would be a release from responsibility and his paralysing worries about life passing him by. Curly continued to seek out the good in Jimmy, regardless of how little respect he had shown him. Whether it was his intention or not, Curly enabled Jimmy's actions. If he had been harsher on him, the whole situation may not have gotten so out of hand. This isn't to say that Jimmy isn't wholly responsible for his actions, but it's an interesting point to think about. Anya's full name looks like Anya Muzume. Anya means mother in Hungarian, which is hauntingly symbolic of her role in the story. As mentioned earlier, Anya was modelled after Wendy in The Shining, a character who also suffers at the hands of an unravelling man. There are a lot of parallels between Jack Torrance and Jimmy, and I believe this was intentional. Both men began as characters the women trusted and perhaps even loved, whether as a partner or a friend. They both break down in an isolated setting, both plagued by vivid hallucinations, becoming more and more violent as the story progresses. Both characters have a madness mantra, Jack's famously being, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," and Jimmy's of course being, "I'll take care of it." Their behaviour and even their appearance is similar. Her favourite Pokemon is Glaceon. This may be a coincidence, but Glaceon is one of the only Pokemon that can use their main attack while asleep, and this may be related to Anya's worries about being able to defend herself at night. Anya tried and failed to get into medical school 8 times, a true testament to her tenacity and ambitious nature. She decided to train with the Pony Express in order to gain experience as a nurse and to fund future attempts. During her time on board the Tolpar, Anya discovered a newfound interest in psychology. She loves to read, evidenced by the abundance of books found in her office. She's artistic, her corkboard littered with photographs and doodles. It's also covered in posters about anxiety and mental health, representing how introspective and caring she is. Most of her free time is spent studying, and she binges on fast food and bad reality TV when she's low, running to clear her head. Anya's character is a little bit more difficult to interpret. Most of what we see of her is through the eyes of an unreliable narrator who doesn't even acknowledge her as a human being. On top of this, her true personality is likely suppressed due to the trauma she's experienced. From the few segments we spend playing as Curly and other context clues, it seems Anya is a smart and resourceful woman who cares deeply for others. She's playful, joking around with Curly about Swansea's note, and with Swansea about his secret love for crappy birthday cake. She has a competitive streak, taking board games very seriously and cursing Daisuke for his luck. Not to mention, she's an incredibly intelligent woman, though her life circumstances may be holding her back. She's often taunted by the other crew members for not being good at her job, though she managed to keep Curly alive for 4 months all on her own with limited supplies, and that is without going to med school. She had a promising career in medicine ahead of her, most definitely. As she mentioned to Jimmy, she has an inherent desire or perhaps need to see the best in people, similar to Curly. She kept Curly alive and treated him with nothing but kindness and care despite believing he purposefully crashed the ship. She remained civil with Jimmy, desperate to see something in him other than evil. I think the reason she abstained from drinking the mouthwash for so long was to protect the baby, regardless of how it was created. Though of course I would respect whatever choice she made, this is very telling of how deeply she cares for everyone and everything. It was only when she realised this was futile that she decided it was best to end both of their suffering. Overall, Anya is a complex character that unfortunately gets reduced to what happened to her. She repeats her belief that our worst moments don't define us, though this is exactly what happens to her in the story. We see very little of Anya outside her worst moment. This is symbolic of how real-life victims are reduced to just that, victims. They become nothing more than a statistic, stripped of their humanity and individuality. The dynamic shown between Anya and Jimmy is uncomfortably close to how the dynamic between victim and abuser may appear in real life, especially in a workplace setting. We can imply that Jimmy's harassment started off as small uncomfortable comments that Anya and the rest of the crew could easily brush off, such as his comment in the psych eval about his sexual attraction to cartoon horses. These weird remarks can easily be dismissed as harmless jokes, though they can be a sign of something more sinister festering beneath the surface. We know that Jimmy makes Anya uncomfortable, given her reluctance to be in a room alone with him during his evaluation. She's often startled when being approached by Jimmy, such as when she's staring at the bottle of mouthwash in the lounge or when he interrupts her and Swansea's conversation in the cockpit. She is clearly uncomfortable in his presence. She panders to him, remarking on how capable he is and how she believes in him. She makes a point of reassuring and congratulating him after he completes small tasks and allows him to take credit for all of her ideas. In fact, most of the tasks in the game are Anya's ideas, such as retrieving the code scanner to enter the cargo hold and getting the spare medicine from the depot locker. Despite all of this, Jimmy insists that he has done everything to help keep the crew going, and Anya doesn't argue with him. As I mentioned earlier, these are examples of fawn responses, a survival mechanism to keep her safe from her abuser. How Jimmy views Anya is telling of his character. He doesn't even see her as a person. When she's locked in the medbay, he exclusively cares about Curly and their medical supplies, ignoring her altogether. He sees all of the other characters at one point or another in his hallucination sequences, though Anya doesn't appear in any of them. She's represented by Polly, further dehumanizing her. There are 2 interpretations of the dissonance between Anya's demeanour when we play as Curly and when we play as Jimmy. The first is that Jimmy sees her differently to the way other people do, regarding her as a weak, nervous failure of a nurse. Her sharp change in personality could also be due to her trauma. Trauma can literally alter your brain chemistry and completely change your personality. It seems that the obvious shift in her demeanour happens soon after she realises she's pregnant. There's a theory circling around in the community that Jimmy may have been drugging Anya. Considering the thin walls of the ship and the consequences if he were to be caught, this isn't entirely out of the realm of possibility for Jimmy. Jimmy was suspiciously confident that the spiked cocktail would be able to knock out Swansea, and that he would have no recollection of events after the fact. With his proximity to Curly, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to obtain the code for the sweetener and to get disinfectant from the medroom. It's also entirely possible that Anya may not have fully realised what had been happening until she discovered she was pregnant, which accounts for the sudden change. At first glance, Daisuke simply appears as a comedic relief character, though he's a symbol of hope amongst the horrors around him. His full name looks like Daisuke Juarez. Daisuke has 3 potential meanings in Japanese, those being big assist, big mediate, and big bless. I think all 3 are appropriate representations of Daisuke's role in the story. He was put on the ship as Swansea's assistant. He acts as an intermediate between the extremes of the other characters, such as trying to calm Jimmy down when he found out about the cryopod, suggesting talking it out with Swansea. And of course he was a massive blessing on the ship, and he was a beacon of light and well beloved by his crew. He was modelled on Keito Haruhiko as Ryosuke Kawashima from the Japanese horror movie Pulse. He also might have been modelled on his character in Cairo, but I feel like Ryosuke fits a little better. Ryosuke shows the same optimistic traits as his mouthwashing counterpart, in contrast to the other characters. There's one particular quote that sticks out to me. Ryosuke says, "Just maybe in 10 years, or at least while we're still alive, they'll invent a drug that prevents death. Then we could live forever and ever." Of course you might say I'm crazy, but I'd much rather bet on that. And that really feels like something Daisuke would say. Daisuke's favourite Pokemon is Weragarurumon, which isn't even a Pokemon, it's a Digimon. It's also definitely the most obscure favourite character of the crew, which makes sense as we know Daisuke likes to play video games in his free time, evidenced by the game kit he keeps at his bedside. In the developer Q&A, it's noted that Daisuke enjoys spending his time at local arcade and thrifting vintage clothing. This is an interesting detail as it's entirely possible that at the point of time they're in, Hawaiian shirts, like Daisuke's signature pink hibiscus shirt, might be classified as vintage. At first, Daisuke was upset that his parents forced him into an apprenticeship with the Pony Express. Despite his apprehension, he put on a brave face, and I think it's safe to say he came to enjoy working on the Tulpar. He describes his experience as apprentice to Anya as awesome, totally cool, and super awesome, really awesome. However, we do catch a glimpse of a more reserved and less joyful Daisuke when we see him drunk in the hallway. Whether it's an act he puts on or a genuine reflection of his nature, he is unrelentingly optimistic. He often talks about how the prospect of the crew being rescued as if it's an inevitability. He talks about how famous they're all going to be when they get home and all the media attention their epic story of survival will attract. He jests about all the favour it will garner with the ladies. The first thing that comes to his mind when Swansea passes out from the spiked cocktail is how this would affect his references. Despite his undeniable innocence and frustrating naivety, his positivity is admirable. Swansea is the eldest of the crew, thus having the most jaded outlook on life. He's actually my favourite in terms of writing. His full name appears to be Swansea Harold. His first name containing swan is relevant, as swans are known to be fiercely protective of their young and to kill them if they're morbidly wounded. This metaphor is further substantiated by the swan keyring on his keys. I've also seen a connection drawn between Swansea's name and the Welsh town. Swansea was famously referred to by British poet Dylan Thomas as the graveyard of ambition, due to the fact that many people who came to the city never left. This mirrors the way Swansea feels about the Pony Express and it being a means to an end before his retirement. This is highlighted in Swansea's drunken spoutings to Jimmy and Daisuke outside the utility room. He rants to Daisuke, telling him that he doesn't belong there with a bunch of sad sack adults and that there's nothing for him to learn. Swansea's favourite Pokemon is Herdia, which is also my favourite Pokemon, and that likely stems from his love of dogs. He has a framed picture of his dog on his desk in the utility room. The picture's facing him and always in view, whereas another picture frame, presumably containing a family photo, lies face down behind him. Also, with the dog's fur colourings, he kind of looks like Daisuke, which is absolutely adorable, so I'm going to believe it was intentional. He was modelled on Brendan Gleeson as Frank in 28 Days Later. His sense of humour is dry and often dark, dancing and laughing in the face of death. A little quirk I really appreciated is Swansea's love of writing notes. He leaves post-it notes everywhere, and one hangs around a swan's neck on his keys, comedically saying, "Where the fuck are my keys?" His office is disorganised, papers and notes strewn everywhere with storage containers unhelpfully labelled stuff and things.
I'm doing stuff, Lori. Things, stuff, things, 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 it's stuff, things, stuff, things.
Unexpectedly, Swansea seems like a real family man, though he would never admit it. He uses repairing things in his adult kids' apartments as an excuse to check up on them, always treating them to a meal. He often takes his wife out to fancy dinners and of course always calls ahead to see if the dog can come too. Up until 2 months after the crash, he was a recovered alcoholic and would buy himself a new pair of trainers every year to celebrate his soberversary. Like many of the characters, he's struggling to find direction in his life after giving up alcohol. He has tried to build a life for himself, starting a family and getting a respectable job, everything any upstanding member of society ought to do. He never takes life too seriously, perhaps using his dry sense of humour as armour to hide his perceived weakness. He reflects on his days as an alcoholic, regarding them as the best of his life. Though he tries to and may genuinely enjoy his new life, nothing will ever compare to the freedom of degeneracy. I love Swansea as a character, and he feels extremely real. Daisuke is a bright-eyed young man, a stark contrast to Swansea's gruff, hardened exterior. They have a father-son, grumpy sunshine character dynamic that evolves along with the story. There are several instances in which Daisuke and Swansea are presented as polar opposites. In the utility room, we can see Swansea's sternly worded notes littered around. Daisuke puts his doodles up next to them, scrawling on his notes, creating a nice juxtaposition between their personalities. Daisuke's tornado-like, bashful personality challenges Swansea's more somber, neat approach to life and his work. Swansea compares Daisuke and Anya to his own children in the very first chapter, where he says to Curly, "Just like my own useless kids back home." He acts as a father figure to the younger members of the crew, taking Daisuke under his wing. He tries to act coy and doesn't let on his fondness of Daisuke. Any praise he does allow Daisuke is enveloped in witty quips demeaning his character. I feel Swansea tries to be a parent to Daisuke as perhaps he misses his kids at home, though he wouldn't admit it. Thrust into an uncertain, grown-up world, Daisuke craves someone to care for him in the way that a father might, which is why I think they bonded to each other. The Tulpar crew can be viewed through the lens of the five-man band trope. This is a common trope in media, and though there are many interpretations, the classic variation fits the best. The 5 archetypes are the leader, the foil, the complementary or emotional support, the brains, and the brawn. I think all of the characters fall nicely into each of these roles. As the captain, Curly is the obvious choice for the place of the leader. Jimmy is not only a foil to Curly, he's the foil to the whole ship. He is the dead pixel in the screen, the sugar in the mouthwash. He is the emergency sealant foam that blocks their only prospect of escape. He's the downfall of everything. I think Daisuke resonates the most with the emotional support, as he helps to keep the crew in high spirits. Anya is clearly the brains and Swansea the brawn. Each of the characters have a different text colour to help the player distinguish between the dialogue more easily, though I believe these were chosen very deliberately. Curly is white, which represents perfection, peace, and neutrality. Jimmy is green, which can mean envy, greed, and selfishness. Anya is blue, which has connotations of dependability, but also of passiveness and sorrow. Daisuke is pink, a lively colour that represents youth and innocence, and therefore also a level of immaturity. Swansea's yellow could symbolise his warmth and humour, though it could also be a metaphor for how Swansea is in the sunset years of his employment and his life overall. These colours can be seen throughout the game. The first example is in the board game in the lounge, which has pieces to represent Jimmy, Anya, Daisuke, and Swansea. Though Curly doesn't have a piece, the board spaces are white, and this could be symbolic of Curly being the glue that holds them all together. The same idea can be seen on the birthday cake, with the 4 candle colours in the white icing. When Curly finds Anya in the cockpit and she reveals to him that she's pregnant, we see a shot of her from above. Her surroundings are dark, but the green light from the screens is cast over her back. This is a subtle detail that represents the control Jimmy has over her, and subconsciously tells the player who the father is, if they don't already know. Furthermore, Jimmy's chair is always askew, whereas Curly's is always facing straight ahead. Another small detail that tells us that something isn't quite right with his character, and that he may not have good intentions. Another interesting piece of symbolism is the crew's ID cards. These are littered around the ship to find, and the player gets a Steam achievement for finding each of them, adding more emphasis. Where the cards are found holds a lot of symbolism, and the state they're in reflects the ways the respective characters died. The first ID card to be found is Anya's at the very beginning of the game. Her card is found fully intact inside the utility locker in the cockpit. This could either be a nod to her taking the gun from the locker, or perhaps how she feels suffocated and silenced by Jimmy and Curly, the men who have access to that locker. It's intact because Anya's injuries were more internal. Daisuke's ID card can be found in the lounge, lying next to the board game. It's crumpled at the sides, the chunk missing from the middle. We know that Daisuke loved to play this board game, so it feels appropriate to place it here. The gash in the centre of course resembles the axe wound in his face. Swansea's ID card is sitting in the slot of the broken coffee machine. His card has a hole in the centre and bits missing from the edges. This may be a bit of a stretch, but a lot of recovering alcoholics turn to drinking coffee to help alleviate some of the withdrawal symptoms. Curly also comments that this machine has been out of coffee for months. The hole in the centre represents the bullet wound inflicted by Jimmy. Jimmy's ID card is found in the hat of the broken Polly statue in the lounge. This is a further allusion to the wider metaphor of Polly in the story. I'll talk about this more in detail later. It also has holes in it to represent bullet wounds, this time self-inflicted. Lastly, Curly's ID is lying on the floor next to the working cryo chamber. This is an act of foreshadowing, as that is where he would ultimately end up, and likely die. The card is almost entirely obliterated, much like Curly himself after the crash. The attention to detail in the ship's design is genuinely outstanding. The crew's sleeping arrangements really tell us a lot about them. Swansea sleeps alone next to the door closest to the medical room, while the other three sleep on the other side of the lounge. As the game progresses, you can see the piles of empty mouthwash bottles growing as they begin to cover his bed. This is symbolic of how his addiction begins to consume him once more. Daisuke and Jimmy sleep beside each other near the lounge door next to the kitchen. Daisuke's bed is always messy and a pile of his things lie to the side. He has a gaming magazine, pink dumbbells and a game kit that's definitely not a copyright-friendly Game Boy. This summarises his interests and personality well. Anya sleeps directly opposite her abuser, perhaps so she's always aware of his location and what he's doing. She has placed herself, likely intentionally, under the motion-activated talking Polly animatronic. If anyone were to walk near her bed, the noise would be triggered, acting as a makeshift alarm. Her bed is always made, which could mean one of two things. She's simply a tidy person, which is unlikely seeing the state of her office even before the crash. The second is that she never sleeps in it altogether. I feel as if she would opt to sleep in one of the rooms with the lock, either the med room or the cockpit. Potentially my favourite detail in the game is the game board in the lounge. This game has many different variations depending on which country you're in. For me, I know it as Ludo, but in France this game is called Jeu de Petits Chevaux, which it's been a long time since I did French, which translates to Game of the Little Horses. We'll go with this as it makes more sense due to all of the horse imagery throughout the game. This is a 4-player strategy game where each of the players have 4 little horse-shaped pieces. Each player must race to move all 4 of their pieces from their yard to their home column. To move a piece out of their yard, they must first roll a 6. A player may have as few or as many pieces as they want in play at any one time, though only one piece may be moved per roll of the dice. Once a piece has left the yard, it's allowed to progress forward the number of squares as represented by the number on the dice. Pieces may jump over other pieces when moving, though if there are 2 pieces of the same colour on a square, they may not move past them. If an opposing player's piece lands on a square with another piece, the latter piece is sent back to the player's yard, back to the beginning. The first player to get all 4 pieces into their home column wins. No one should hire me to write board game instructions, this is too difficult. The pieces move around the board as the story progresses, holding some plot relevance. There are graphics on the Mouthwashing wiki that show diagrams of the different stages of the board. I'll show these as the pieces are much harder to see in the actual game. At the very beginning of the story, before the crash, the board looks like this. The colours match the text colours of the characters. Anya is blue, Daisuke pink, Jimmy's green and Swansea yellow. Anya is in the lead, taking a more calculated approach. 3 of her pieces have left the yard, with one about to enter the home column. Jimmy is just behind, with 1 piece in his home column and another approaching Anya from behind. Jimmy has taken a strategy with a more instant payoff, though this may not play out for him in the long run. These strategies feel very representative of their personalities. Jimmy's piece approaching Anya is a sinister piece of foreshadowing. The next change in the board's configuration happens 4 months after the crash. We see the board while Anya is locked in the medical room. All of Anya's pieces are knocked over, with one in the home column and another about to enter. The knocked over pieces of course denote her death, though we don't know it yet. The placement of these pieces is symbolic of how her life was cut short when she had such a bright future ahead of her. 2 pieces stand either side of her, one Daisuke's and the other Jimmy's. This mirrors how she was found, Daisuke crawling out of the vent to see her body, Jimmy dragging him out from the other side. Swansea was unconscious at this point, and his pieces are all on the opposite side of the board. The next change happens after Daisuke's death. As you can probably guess, this time both Anya and Daisuke's pieces are knocked over. 2 of Daisuke's pieces never even made it out of the yard, one only having just left. This is a cruel reminder of his youth and how his life had not yet even started. Swansea and Jimmy stand on one square, Daisuke's fallen piece beside them. This mirrors the scene in the lounge. Swansea approaches Jimmy's piece. By the rules of the game, this should cause Jimmy's piece to be sent back to the beginning. However, we see what happened in the next iteration of the board game. This last change happens after Swansea's death. Jimmy's piece is not sent back to the yard, rather has continued to progress while Swansea's is toppled over on the same space. This is symbolic of Jimmy attacking Swansea out of turn and killing him. At this point, all of Swansea's pieces have left his yard, suggesting he was coming to the end of his life, or at least his working years. He continues to progress across the board as the first piece approaches the centre of the home row. Furthermore, there may also be a wider metaphor in the board game that all of the characters are just pawns in a larger game, unwittingly orchestrated by the Pony Express and their negligence. Mouthwashing makes use of many arc phrases. These are phrases that don't have meaning until a certain point in the story, such as the phrase bad wolf in Doctor Who. The only one of these I haven't really gotten into is kills 99%. This only appears a few times in the story and is, of course, the tagline for the Dragon Breath X company. I think this could be in reference to several things. The main time it appears is after Jimmy walks into the cockpit to crash the ship. Therefore, I think this means that there is a 99.9% chance that Jimmy's plan will work as he intended. It could also allude to the fact that only 0.01% of Curly is left behind to survive after the crash. The choice of mouthwash being their cargo also holds some significance. Mouthwash is ineffective on its own and is not conducive to dental hygiene if used exclusively. It's only enough to wash away what's on the surface, though something rotten could still be festering underneath, just out of sight. As Anya realised, the sugar content of the mouthwash demeans its very purpose. It might be a short-term fix, but cause damage in the long run. I think this proverbial decay is parallel to Jimmy's evil. Something I really appreciated about this game is the imagery used throughout to enhance the story. Perhaps the largest example of this is the artificial window screen in the lounge. It not only adds an element of claustrophobia and a kind of dystopian dread, it gets stuck on the sunset screen when the ship crashes. This is incredibly poignant, symbolising that the Tulpar's voyage and the lives of those on board are coming to an end. It acts as a bad omen, filling the room with an eerie red light. All of their fates have been sealed, and they are powerless to do anything to change that disquieting fact. The dead pixel that Anya sees in the corner of the screen also holds a great level of significance. It starts off as a small, inconsequential flaw in the wider picture of the screen, unnoticed by most of the crew. However, when Swansea swings the axe at the screen, it turns into an ugly, unmistakable fault that covers the entire screen. It can no longer be ignored by the crew, just as they can't ignore the grave situation they're in. Swansea breaking the screen with the axe is also a parallel to what he would eventually have to do to his ray of sunshine, Daisuke. In the final sequences of the game, the sunset is replaced by a red warning sign, symbolising the end of the voyage, a harbinger of death for the remaining crew. Each of the characters have some sort of symbol attached to them. Swansea's is a swan, Daisuke's is a pink hibiscus flower, Anya's is a horse, and Curly's is an eye. I don't think Jimmy has one, though I may be wrong. I talked earlier about what swans represent in terms of Swansea's character, so I'll spare you the spiel for that one. Pink hibiscus not only has connotations of youth, happiness and innocence, but it's also a symbol of dying young, as they only bloom for a couple of days. This rings true for Daisuke, and explains the flowers beside his gravestone and next to his picture in the graveyard. This flower also shows up among Daisuke's things in one of the final hallucination sequences, where Jimmy's walking backwards through the vent. Curly's eye is one that speaks for itself. After the crash, Curly is left with one bulging bright blue eye. This eye follows the player's every move, the last piece of Curly's autonomous movement. It's seen everywhere throughout the game, even appearing in its logo. Eyes are a prominent feature in several of Jimmy's hallucination sequences. Curly's eye peering out at him from between the boxes in the cargo hold or under the metal grate flooring. At one point, Jimmy has to walk through a hallway with the walls entirely made up of watchful eyes. This not only represents Jimmy's feeling that Curly is watching over him, though also symbolises how the ability to turn a blind eye has been stripped away from Curly. He's forced to watch Jimmy's actions and their consequences. Anya's symbol, at least in Jimmy's eyes, is the Pony Express mascot Polly. This leads us into another massive segment of our analysis. Towards the end of the game, Jimmy has hallucination sequences, where he's presented with what he's done to Swansea, Daisuke and Curly, though Anya never appears in any of these. In the developer console, there's a list of the chapters, including a short synopsis of what happens in each. There are 3 major Bizarro sequences before the game concludes. The first is described as an end to Swansea and Daisuke's arcs, and the second the end to Curly's arc. Anya never gets any kind of closure, Jimmy doesn't even acknowledge her. The final Bizarro sequence that should conclude her story is just described as the conclusion to Polly's arc. Polly is used as a physical representation of Anya's unborn child. I will go through the evidence to support this and also its greater meaning in the context of the story. Throughout the game, despite his earlier comment about being sexually attracted to Polly, he makes sure to show his disdain for the mascot. He's often irritated by Polly's voice lines, eventually destroying the statue, though he's unable to silence it. I think this is indicative of his feelings toward Anya. The Polly mascot is absolutely everywhere on the ship, on the posters that adorn the walls, the talking animatronic in the lounge, the figurines. He also makes appearances in many of the hallucination sequences. It seems to be following Jimmy everywhere, as if it's goading him to acknowledge that it's even there. In the Bizarro sequences, Jimmy is always running from some nightmarish version of Polly, just as he runs from taking responsibility for Anya's assault. In the very beginning of the game, Jimmy's path out of the cockpit is blocked by the Polly figures, forcing him to turn back. In the cargo hold, he must sneak past a blind Polly he's unable to run from. In the vent system, he has to hide around corners to escape the pursuit of the Polypede. Another reason the fetus is represented by the company mascot is because the Pony Express played a part in its conception. If the Pony Express were responsible, none of this would have happened. At the very end of the game, Jimmy is cornered and forced to have a conversation with Polly. He stands unavoidable on a mountain of mouthwash, finally given a voice and unable to be ignored any longer. Polly and Anya have the same text colour, which is further evidence to back this theory. Furthermore, Polly calls Jimmy old man, a term commonly used to refer to one's father, which is perhaps the most damning evidence. Jimmy tries to dismiss Polly, saying, "Pony Express is dead, and so are you." I believe this is him talking to the child that died along with Anya. He alleges that he's finally taking responsibility and apologises to Curly. He expresses his desire to make things right and regurgitates Anya's words. "Our worst moments don't make us..." Before Polly cuts him off, and it feels as if he's trying to vindicate Anya. He says, "Wait a minute, hold on. If all of that is true, why are you still so concerned with him?" Another theory is that this Polly is an embodiment of Anya talking to Curly, and she's finally able to release her pent-up anger. He has dehumanized her in his mind to a point where he is physically unable to see her as a person anymore. I believe Polly is simultaneously a manifestation of Anya and her unborn child. In Mouthwashing, Curly's fate is used as an abstract representation of SA and the trauma it leaves behind. The act of Curly being forced to swallow the pills by Jimmy is a direct parallel to Anya's assault. Perhaps why she finds doing it herself or even watching it so nauseating. Curly is entirely at Jimmy's mercy, having his ability to say no or to stop him stripped away. This helplessness feels similar to the helplessness many victims of SA experience. There's even a Steam achievement called Sock Puppet you can get by repeatedly opening and closing Curly's mouth, placing emphasis on the fact that Curly's now entirely under the control of another. This additional layer of meaning made the scenes where you have to give Curly his painkillers all the more uncomfortable for me after my first playthrough. The illusion of choice. Another thing I wanted to touch on before we tie up some loose ends and get into the conclusion of this video essay is how the game presents the illusion of choice. This idea was first brought up in How Fish is Made, where fish must choose whether to go up or down, not knowing what each choice means. The books in the lounge and the bedroom act as a reminder to the player and the characters that their choices mean nothing. This concept is effectively used against the player in many instances. In the very first scene, the player is given the illusion of choice when they're presented with a choice dialogue for a fixed outcome. You're technically able to choose, though you can only choose one option in order for the story to progress. The time markers are a looming reminder of the events to come, taunting the player. Whatever choices you make in the game, the ending will always be the same. The game also takes a more literal approach with this, as at one point there's an optical illusion with the stairs leading to the cockpit. It becomes impossible to really tell at a glance whether you're going up or down, which I find is a really fun detail. Anyway, that's enough rambling about that. The overarching theme of Mouthwashing is corporate greed. The Pony Express is in no capacity a good company to work for. They seem to care very little about their employees and their quality of life during transit time. They penalise their staff for getting more than 5 hours of sleep per night and dock their pay for sickness and injury while on board. The food provided is mediocre at best and potentially harmful to health. Anya mentions that there was a scandal involving the contents of the food packets. Their water tastes like warm plastic and the gelatin is lumpy and unpleasant. Sweetener, though a mockery of sugar, is considered a luxury item only to be accessed by the captain. Only one birthday celebration is permitted per trip. However, these inconveniences pale in comparison to the grievous lack of concern for employee safety. The Pony Express added Daisuke to the haul at the last minute, meaning there would only be 4 cryostasis pods amongst 5 crew members. The Tollpass failsafe foam mechanism is inconvenient at best, but could easily be deadly. It seems cheap to have such a poorly designed safety feature, considering the advanced technology seen elsewhere on the ship. They neglected to put a lock on the sleeping quarters, allowing a sole female member of the crew to be horrifically assaulted. It's also mentioned that the ship is inexcusably old and in bad shape. The backup generator is outdated and the ship is showing some serious signs of wear and tear, despite advancements in technology. The company is at least partially responsible for all of the deaths on board. If there were locks on the private areas, an assault may never have happened, at least to the degree that it did. If it had been more difficult to override the ship's autopilot, Jimmy would never have been able to crash the ship in the first place. He may not even have been compelled to if they didn't lay their entire crew off without warning or support. If their safety mechanisms had been better designed, the cryostasis pods wouldn't be compromised. This isn't to say that Jimmy's actions are not entirely and completely his fault, but he wouldn't have been able to get away with it if it weren't for the shortcomings of the Pony Express. All of the player objectives in the game have the Pony Express logo next to them, further adding to the idea that they're inadvertently orchestrating the events. And that's all from me. If you're still here or even still awake, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. It means the world to me as I'm just starting out. This game means so much to me, and I've been working on this video essay since November because I really wanted this to be as comprehensive as possible. There are still almost definitely things I've missed, so please let me know in the comments. Also, let me know which piece of media you'd like me to cover next. Thanks so much again, and if I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.